There have been many operations in Rainbow Six Siege that have made the game a lot better or a lot worse. One update, however, completely protected the game from dying within its first 2 years of its life. This is the operation that saved Rainbow Six Siege. To find out what this operation was, we need to rewind to December 1st of 2015. This is the day that Rainbow Six Siege would be released around the world. But just like many other game releases, Siege's launch would come with bugs and glitches. These bugs ranged far and wide. There were a lot of them, from having a bug that would leave shadow figures around, to bugs that would allow you to get Jaeger's deployable shield on his head, making him bulletproof. You get it by now, there were a lot of issues. There were many more game-breaking bugs and glitches up for exploit, and honestly, there were more than a normal game release. This caused Siege on release to go from overwhelmingly positive on Steam charts to more of a mixed-ish review. The game, for lack of a better word, was broken. But after a few series of updates and patches from Ubisoft within the first month of the game's release, most of these bugs were solved within the same month that they were even discovered. The issue was that they were being discovered so fast. In fact, there were more bugs being released than there were being patched. Not only did the game have a lot of bugs that couldn't be patched quick enough, but matchmaking was another issue entirely as well. The matchmaking in this game was absolutely broken and would give you more errors than it even does now. People weren't distributed in their skill bracket and ranked as evenly either, but also the queue times were god-awful. Finding a game that you could stay connected to if the servers didn't randomly go out for 48 hours was about as common as having a cheater-free game is now. Even if matchmaking wasn't the issue, servers often were shutting down or downright not working, with some servers being down again for almost 48 hours at a time. All of this and more would last for not one season, not 2 seasons, not 3 or 4 or even 5, but 6 entire seasons. The game would be a fest of bugs, exploits, terrible matchmaking, and bad servers. It was playable at some points, and honestly, the majority of the time. Don't get me wrong, but something had to change, and that change was the update that is the topic of today's video. Year 2, Season 2, Operation Health. Now that you know what season saved Siege, how did this season in particular save the game exactly? Well, before the launch of Operation Health, Ubisoft announced that they would use this season entirely as a way to fix the game. Instead of releasing any new content, like a new map or 2 new operators like they'd been doing, they would focus on existing content and just fixing all of the issues that have been plaguing the game that I previously mentioned. And they would do so in 3 different updates during the season. The first update, or pillar, was Ubisoft's attempt to fix matchmaking and server issues. Like I said, matchmaking was bad back then. To be able to queue a game of ranked, it even took multiple steps to be able to do so. Now, after the first pillar, all you have to do is hit the ranked button and you're completely set. This wasn't the only thing Ubisoft did, however, to fix matchmaking. Ubisoft would also promise faster queue times, and they promised better servers as well. For the most part, we did get this kind of, so good on Ubisoft. Step 1 would also include server-based features as well, meaning that every piece of debris, every operator body, and every bullet would be registered by the server and be server-sided, and not by the player's client and be client-sided. It would make it to where if there was a dead body on the ground, everybody saw that dead body. If there was debris, everybody could see that debris. That way somebody couldn't see you through a wall that's only open on your side, when in reality they can't even see it from their side. Not only would it fix the game from perspective, but this would cause better hit registration, less of a lag differential between most players, and just more reliability with the game overall. It just made the game more consistent. But now that we're done talking about Pillar 1, let's talk about Pillar 2. Pillar 2, I think, is the most underrated update in Rainbow Six Siege history. Pillar 2 would completely rework everything we know about developers and how they developed the game of Siege. Essentially, the way that Siege had been patching things and updating the game before was inefficient and way too complicated. What they would change to with this pillar was essentially testing out changes in test server, then releasing it to PC, and then releasing it to console. And this is how they would do it from every update here on out. That way, they could test anything and find bugs in the test server, and then they would release it on PC and say if PC liked the changes and if there were any bugs that they could find. And then once PC and test server had pretty much tested everything out, then they would release it to the majority of their player base, which are console players. It was a 3-step plan that ensured that the least amount of bugs were released to the least amount of people before they ended up getting caught. This would give a lot of testing to see if there were any bugs and would catch a lot more before they initially spread. But that isn't even the coolest thing they did, because it's a video game, and it's a video game that gets gets updated often. So there's still, even with this 3-step plan, going to be issues. So Ubisoft would also implement a developer on and off switch. Essentially, if they released something and it was bad with a lot of bugs, they could flip a switch and immediately revert the game back to an old version before they updated and spread the bad bug. So they could fix the issue and essentially shut it down from spreading immediately. This was huge because before, if something happened, Ubisoft couldn't stop it and it would spread like wildfire until they found a way to fix it and until they updated the game again. But now the second they know about it, they can revert the game back to normal and no elo is harmed. This made a bug outbreak essentially impossible, and even impossible to this day, at least in theory, but more on that later. For now, let's talk about the third pillar, which was fixing all of the bugs that the community was asking for. This was the biggest and arguably the most important and sought after pillar that people were looking for. Ubisoft would address bugs in a manner that they thought would please the majority of their audience. They essentially would leave it up to a poll, and the most voted bug would be the bug that they would prioritize on fixing compared to other ones that weren't really that big of a deal. Things like Blitz's hitbox, hit registration, and other bugs would be things of the past with this new update. But even with Ubisoft's master 3-step plan, everything would still go wrong. But how? Well, the main reason that Siege was so buggy in the first place was because of big updates. Every time a game gets updated, you have new code that sometimes doesn't get double checked, allowing for unintended changes or bugs. That's how bugs usually happen. So even if the changes that are implemented are meant to fix bugs, even if you have 3 really good updates, they're still updates. So in this instance, even though the update was to counter bugs, because it's still an update, it would cause bugs. This made this season, even in today's eyes, extremely controversial for the average player at the time. This is one of, if not the most memed on season, because it was a season meant to fix a lot of bugs and actually caused more bugs than they initially sought out to fix. It was so bad that ranked was almost impossible for the average player, and this was actually considered to be the worst season of ranked from a lot of players who played through because of this. So how did such a bad season that had so much potential that just immediately failed actually save Rainbow Six Siege? Well, when Ubisoft said they wanted to fix the game with this season, they meant it. They saw the new bugs coming in even after they updated it, but they didn't let that stop them. They went in and fixed almost every single one of them, one by one, bug by bug, like combing knots out of a head of hair. It took a lot of time, and the player base was not happy, to say the least. It took so long that they actually extended how long the season was actually going to be, just so they could really focus on fixing the core issues. A lot of people will tell you that Ubisoft is a money-hungry company that doesn't care about balancing or their community, and there may be at least a tad bit of truth in that statement. But if that were really truly the case, wholeheartedly, they would have just rolled out Year 2 Season 3 and put bugs to the side for new content, but they didn't. They continued Operation Health and the fixes that came along with it, and they were dedicated so much that they actually extended Operation Health for an extra 3 months, on top of the 3 months that a normal season in Siege lasts. Not only did this make the community unhappy, as they hated the season at large and hated that it had to last longer, but also this made people unhappy because of the content they were missing. Essentially, people had bought the year passes, giving them access to skins and operators a week before their release. With this extension to Operation Health, people wouldn't get their promised content of the next season when it was promised to them. If the season lasted 3 more months, that also meant that Operation Health, which was hell to play through if you played with the bugs as a whole, would last half of a year, which would get very stale very quick. Like I said, this was and still is a lot of people's least favorite season, especially when you compare it to other content-filled seasons that we would receive later down the line. Let's take Operation Shadow Legacy, for example. Operation Shadow Legacy was one of the biggest seasons for new content ever in the game, arguably the biggest content season in Rainbow Six Siege history. Not only did the Operator Zero come out for the attack, but they also reworked one of the worst maps of all time, which was Chalet. Chalet went from being one of the most unplayable maps in the ranked pool to one of the best completely overnight. So not only did this season bring a lot of changes, but it brought a lot of good changes too. But this just scratches the surface of what this operation brought for players. Operation Shadow Legacy also introduced Ping 2.0 as well, meaning that anything that you Z-pinged as an attacker or a defender will now show an image of what it actually is, which provides more accurate information, instead of just a normal yellow ping like we used to have. Not only did they rework ping systems in the map Chalet, but they also reworked 2 new operators as well. The first of which being Thatcher. If you didn't know, Thatcher used to destroy gadgets that got hit with his EMP grenade, instead of what we have now, where he just disables them for a short amount of time and they reactivate later. So essentially, if you threw a Thatcher at a wall that was bandited, the bandits would be destroyed. And because you couldn't put multiple bandits on a wall at one time like like you can now, Thatcher was completely broken. If there were any single electronics, echo cams, bulletproof cameras, lesion mines, nitro cells, bandit batteries, anything, you throw one EMP in there out of 3 and all of them are destroyed permanently. So obviously he had to change as an operator, and Ubisoft made that necessary change. The second operator they would rework would be Tachanka. Now if you think Tachanka is bad now, he used to be terrible and completely unusable, and arguably was the worst operator in the game. He used to have just a turret that he would deploy and he or other people could sit on and use, with a face shield on it like old Blackbeard that did a lot of damage but had a slow rate of fire. If you've used his LMG with the big circle drum mag on the top, it's literally the exact same thing, but it was stationary and you couldn't move it without completely disassembling it first. This might sound powerful, but the only issue is that you could just use explosives or go under the Tachanka and kill him or destroy his turret, making him completely useless in almost every single scenario in the game. Now when you play him, he has an actual effective area denial gadget, which makes him slightly better than he used to be. In this season, not only did they rework 2 operators, but they also introduced map bans. This worked a little bit different than what we have now, where we can ban 2 of 5 different maps, because back then you banned 2 of 3 different maps. This allowed PC players to essentially guarantee a map if they communicated together in all chat. You would ask for one ban on one map, the other team would say, okay, we'll ban this map, and both of you knew exactly what map you were getting into. In this season, they would also introduce match replay in the test server in its beta phase, which is the first time we had ever had a match replay system in Rainbow Six Siege. And they would also add the secondary hard reach charge this season. Everybody had to bring a thermite or a Hibana or a Maverick literally every single round to get walls open, but now if you had somebody with hard breaching charges, that wasn't really necessary, which allowed you to have more versatile attacking and defending loadouts. There were 4 more scopes added as well, being the Red Dot C, the Cybertruck Holo, and this is the season that would introduce the 1.5 times scope and the 2x scope. These 2 scopes were some of the most broken scopes in the entire game because you could use them from any distance and then be viable. They also had enough glass space, they didn't take up any peripherals of your screen that were that important, and the crosshairs weren't too invasive. These scopes were so broken and perfect that any operator that had these scopes would immediately become meta, which is why a lot of people even to this day still play Warden. Nobody really played him until he got a 1.5 times scope, and the effects of everybody switching to Warden and ranked are still trickling down to ranked lobbies today. The 2.0 scope was the exact same thing, being a very broken scope in the game, which was what made this season even more controversial. Not only did they add everything that I just talked about, but they also added the reinforcement pool, meaning that everybody could pull from 10 reinforcements, whereas before everybody only had 2 reinforcements per operator. So imagine all of those fun changes that completely changed the game forever. These are all changes that the community had been asking for a while too. Imagine with all of that new content and new content that was good at that, and compare that to Operation Health. Operation Health had 0 new content, and for it having absolutely 0 new content, it lasted half of a year, which is the longest season in Siege history. Pair that up with ranked being completely unplayable because of the bugs that they were trying to fix and the addition of new bugs, and it's no wonder that people hated on this season so much, especially when they're subconsciously comparing it to operations like I discussed earlier, like Operation Shadow Legacy or other ones that were really good. But that's just the thing. All of these good changes that the game did make went completely under the radar. Most people don't know when a bug is fixed because they're not checking the patch notes when they come to the bug fix section. They just check all of the big changes like the reworks, the new maps, stuff like that. So everything that Ubisoft was doing, the player base didn't really see. All of the good changes that this game did make in this season went completely under the radar. Ubisoft fixed hundreds of bugs, completely fixed the server and matchmaking problems at the time, and they did something that most other companies didn't do. They actually fulfilled their promise of what they said they were going to do, and they actually fixed their game. When people think of good seasons, they think of fun, healthy content being added or changed. But when all of these changes are under the surface, like in Operation Health, and don't come with any new content that immediately grabs your eye, it's hard for the casual audience to understand what's going on, and it made everybody only see the bad in the season without seeing the good. This paired up with Ubisoft's silence as to what was actually going on and when it was actually going on, and many other reasons, made Operation Health one of the most controversial seasons in Rainbow Six Siege history. People either loved it or hated it completely outright. But at the end of the day, Ubisoft still got the job done. It may have been terrible to play through, but immediately after this season, the game was in the best state it had ever been. So as much as people hate the season, it might have saved Siege. Because hate on it or not, this season still fixed a lot of issues, and the game was much better after the season release. Since that season, absolute bangers of seasons have been able to come out, like Operation Parabellum, Operation Deadly Omen, and none of them have had as bad of issues as Operation Health. Operation Health would have a lot of issues and turn a lot of eyes from Siege, but the repairs this game made and the dedication the developers had for it, even under the scrutiny and the pressure that they had, is completely unmatched. If Operation Health never happened, even as bad as it was, Siege would be a lot worse. It may be the difference between Siege being a game today or not, which is why Operation Health saved Rainbow Six Siege. But with it out of the way, that's it for today's video. Check out this next video, and I'll see you there.